Hello YouTube, welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be an obligatory vocational trade post. I'm going to be talking about my life working in education. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the last year and how the pandemic factored into my experience as a teacher, and what I enjoyed about the virtual learning process, because for me, I liked it. Okay, before I go into the video, I do want to acknowledge a couple things. The first thing, the school that I worked at during the pandemic was a school where it was a digital magnet school. So the kids had already had their own devices, their own laptops. They already had a they were digital natives, and I was used to conducting classes almost fully asynchronously, which asynchronous is a fancy education type word for the kids were doing a lot of self-instructed learning. The school, the magnet, was started by this guy who just had this idea, this big idea for like a learning lab. I forgot the names they would use to describe what they wanted for their school, but he had a lot of vision, and his vision was basically like written into the DNA of the school was, we want kids to take control of their learning and to be responsible. So I would get a lot of flack for teaching at the front of the classroom and just having them all look at me. Things like having them in small groups, doing projects, that they were leading, giving them the information and having them facilitate their own learning. That is something that I'd been doing since 2016 when I started at that campus. So when the pandemic hit and the kids had to go home with their computers, my students in my magnet, and that's like maybe 500 kids on that campus. It's a big campus, lots of kids, a couple different magnets. My kids were fine initially at the beginning of the pandemic. It was, oh, I have to stay home. That's cool. Oh, I can go online and access different classes when I want. That's cool. I'm going to still get my work in because my parents are going to be on me because, whatever, that's fine. And so initially, virtual learning was not something that threw me for a loop at all. I welcomed it. If you saw my video about living in Los Angeles, that's where the school was that I was working. And so that I was not having the time of my life in LA. And so I welcomed the change of scenery. I welcomed, just a lot of different things that I'm going to talk about in this video. I also want to discuss, though, something really important that I think I need to bring up, which is the virtual learning realities were so different from person to person. If you turned on the TV every night, the news was giving you gloom and doom. Children are suffering from, they're having mental health issues. Parents are suffering from mental health issues, specifically the mothers, because they're taking, the very big gap in gender roles in a household was being widened by the fact that moms now had to work from home with dads, and they were doing most of the work, and then they were leaving the workforce because of that. I know that if I happened to be a teacher who had small children at home, that it would have been a different thing. I know there were some people I worked with who, when they opened the school back up, when you could go up there and just work in your classroom just with no students, they preferred that to being at their homes. So I know that everybody's reality within the pandemic created virtual learning bubble was different. So this is definitely not a video where I'm setting out to say like virtual learning it was superior, and if you didn't feel that way, then screw you. Not at all. I'm just trying to be honest about how I felt about the process, and also give a couple of tips and tricks that I learned that I think that people that are continuing on with virtual learning might want to use. Okay, so the first thing I loved about virtual learning was, like I said before, my students, they knew what they were doing. This was not a situation where we had to be trained, where they had to be taught, where it was like, what? Learning virtually? What? I mean, these kids, they knew what to do. Before the pandemic, like I said, I was working on an asynchronous kind of vibe with them. So I taught a lot of different things on the campus. I taught 2 grade levels. I taught an elective. I taught all 7 periods of the day with just a 30-minute lunch break. In order to keep from going crazy or just completely like fainting in the middle of the room, what I would do is I would organize their content into folders using our learning management system that we used Shout out to Schoology. Wouldn't be nowhere without Schoology. Number one. I'm not even kidding. Like it was a soldier. So the kids, I would put their stuff in little completion folders and they could go to the desktop and I would say, all right, this is during the school year, by the way, before the pandemic. I'd say, all right, 7th grade, today you're on the red folder. Please go in, access the Edpuzzle. Then after you do that, I'd like for you to go and, type on the discussion board. After that, the end of the day, your exit ticket is to produce these kids were used to that rhythm. And again, I did that as a means of survival way before the pandemic because I was teaching so many different things and I had technology, at my fingertips. Why not use it? So I used it and my kids were trained. So when we went into the pandemic, one thing I loved about virtual learning was they got to stretch even more. And you had some kids that really, really thrived off the social environment. And so when they went home, they were like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing this. And their parents were reaching out to me and they were like, how do I help him? I'm not there with him. All I can do is check on him and send him messages. Some people just need that social interaction to be able to be motivated to do anything, especially at their young age. I work with 7th graders. However, the kids who it didn't bother, the kids who were like, okay, it's just for a little while, or okay, I have to do it like this now. I saw them do amazing things. Like I said, I taught a media elective and my kids and I produced a virtual morning announcement show where they went out and they bought little green poster boards and they put them up behind their heads and we used WeVideo, which I can't say enough about WeVideo, and every learning resource. And I realize I say this a lot and then I forget to do it, but I will link these learning resources below because this is amazing stuff and it got me so far. And I used these things for years and I think that they'll be helpful to people. So I will link it. But we used WeVideo, which is Google's virtual video editing system, and it's cloud-based, which means that even if they were working on an iPad that the school gave them, they don't need a hard drive. They don't need, all this space of their own. They can just log into their Google account, go to WeVideo, and then as a site administrator, I can see everything they're working on. So if they're having trouble with doing something, if they're not understanding how to export, if they're working on a project, I can go in and see who the last person was to edit. I can go in and see what they need to add next. If they're working on something for me and they just haven't exported it out yet, which if you don't know about video editing, exporting is just what you do at the end where you send it out so that it can be viewed. I can go in and export it for them. Also, during the year, WeVideo added collaborative editing features. So we could literally share our screens in Zoom and the kids could be editing all together at the same time. That's an amazing tool. And it was really cool to see a certain portion of the population jump in and just become champions of those digital tools. I also had, I think it's through Spotify. I don't know the company. I'll look it up. Of course, after I film, that's my vibe. It's called Soundtrap, and it is a virtual audio editing system, and I'm used to teaching kids audio editing on GarageBand. They have to have the Mac, they have to have a hard drive, they have to have, no. Soundtrap, first of all, was provided free to the schools, which was amazing because one of the annoying things about teaching media was trying to work with Adobe tools, which of course, you have to pay all this money for. And the school that I worked at, they never wanted to spend no money. So it was always like, trying to get free accounts and this and that. And Soundtrap was like, nah, we got you, bro. We'll do it for free. So all I had to do was add it to my Schoology. Kids were able to click on it, go in, create commercials, create podcasts. Soundtrap has this thing where you can virtually record podcasts. And, you can call somebody up like it's a Zoom call and record what you guys are talking about. And that can be your podcast, which is just amazing. So I think the kids learned, they made short films from home. They produced broadcasts from home. They did podcasting in groups from home. At one point, some kids did return to campus and some were still learning from home. And they were able to produce things together. Kids sitting, on campus, kids sitting at home. Hey, let's record this podcast together. So it was great in that way, seeing children just rise to the occasion and become the best version of their digital selves. I loved that. I thought that was so cool. Something else I loved about virtual learning, and this is on a me tip. I mentioned earlier that I worked 7 periods out of the day. So a lot of times, like what teachers will have is they will have an off period. I did not have an off period. And so there was no time really to just sit and process and figure out like what was going on in my life and in my day. And then I did different grade levels. And then within the 7th grade that I taught, I had a regular class, and then I had an honors group, and then I had an academically enriched group. So there was like a group of kids who were running, maybe 95 miles an hour. And there's a group of kids who need you to go 60 miles an hour. And then there's a group of kids who need you to go 30 miles an hour. So I was differentiating there, and differentiation is just a fancy word for doing different assignments to fit different groups of kids. And then I had an 8th grade group, and the 8th grade group would happen to me at the end of the day. And most of them had 504 plans, IEP plans. They had emotional disorders. They had in-class aids. So there was just a lot during the day that I had to process, and my brain always had to be on. I felt like I was in Minority Report, just constantly, sliding things across and trying to. And if I had an off period to just sort of sit back and be like, okay, this is my hour. Like I can go and get a coffee. I can go, but I didn't have that. So it's basically like locked in my room most of the day, which initially I didn't mind, but it did start to get to me. I started to get very stressed out. I started to have low-key panic attacks when I would come to work because I knew I was going to be locked in that room, constantly minority reporting. And it's not like I'm working with, adults. I'm working with kids. So I've got to deal with hormones. I've got to deal with crying. I've got to deal with just different things, just managing their personalities. And I've only got a 30-minute break to try and socialize, feed myself, take some space. I was not well mentally. So when virtual learning came about, and not only, our schedule changed. We went from doing all 7 periods in one day to 4 a day. We would have a homeroom, and then we would do, 2nd, 4th, and 6th period. And then the next day we would have homeroom, and we would do 3rd, 5th, and 7th. The periods were a little bit longer. The day started later. Lunch was longer. I finally had time for lunch. So what I loved about virtual learning was I had time to breathe. Finally, teaching didn't feel like, all gas, no brakes, working in a 24-hour, school factory or something. I got to breathe in and breathe out. And then with doing it online, I mentioned this in my video where I responded to student TikToks. There's a girl who was making fun of teachers who were like, where is everybody? Turn on your computers. I'm tired of these black squares. And the girl was like, making fun of us. And I was fine with the black squares because sometimes my camera was off. Because you know what? I get it. Every day is not your best day. And when you're in person and you're working with the kids, you roll in there. You sometimes people dress up, like I decided to dress up for this. And sometimes you feel like a moldy old potato, and that's how you feel. And so the absolute freedom we got with Zoom to be able to say, no thanks, camera off. Wonderful. It was wonderful. So when it came to virtual learning, what I loved was the freedom to breathe. And I had not really known that as a teacher. I had not known just my brain can take a break. And I'm so jealous of people who work at places where they're like, this is our pool table where we play pool and just play around with ideas. This is where we let people take naps. This is our napping pod. People that work at places like Google or Facebook, or when I was in college, I thought I wanted to work in advertising. So I toured some advertising agencies, and I would have worked there. Just to be clear, they did not want to hire me because I had like a television and film degree, and this was 2007 and no one wanted to hire. Anyway, so I toured advertising agencies. In one place, they were like, this is where we have our beers on tap for our beer clients. They may come in, and sometimes when our associates are on a break, they're allowed to take a beer back to their desk. Come on. When you are teaching, you have to be on. It is all about the kids, and especially in the role that I was in. So yeah, virtual learning it gave me a break. It let me breathe. And I love that. All right, the final thing that I loved about virtual learning. So I kind of hit on this a little earlier when I said, you're working with kids, you're not working with people who are held accountable, or people who have account of their own emotions. I don't really know how to say it, but you're not working with people who can get themselves together always, right? And so as a teacher, you're constantly confronted with a whole range of human emotions that you maybe wouldn't be confronted with if you were working with a group of adults. I used to have a group of girls that would come in my room every day at lunch, and they would weep the entire 30-minute lunch period that I had. They would just cry. And one girl, she wept all the way through lunch and refused to go to her next class because she wanted to stay with me and cry some more. So that's a lot of emotion that you're privy to every day. And I think they were crying. Everybody liked the same boy. I think that's what that was about that year. But there are bigger things. I remember one year watching a little black girl get bullied. The area that I was in was not very diverse. It was mostly Latino and Armenian, which is LA. That's the population. There were maybe like 7 black kids on my campus. Mostly the population where I was. I was in like North Hollywood, but not the arts district. The I don't know, directional, whatever. But where I was, it was mostly Latino and Armenian. And I was the first black person that a lot of those kids had ever heard talk, So I know from growing up in an all white neighborhood that when that's the situation, a lot of times you're going to have very negative stereotypes that are directed towards black children. I experienced it growing up in a white suburb. But in this situation, it was just plain old xenophobia. These little boys didn't know anything about her, but what they knew was she was hitting on them and trying to say they were cute and wanting them to give her hugs. Little girls are. And they were responding in these really virulent and violent and just verbally acerbic. Like they were responding to her, so they were mean to her and very racist towards her. And I found out what was going on, and I stepped in and I mediated it. And I took them, to church, basically with, and they were all like crying in my room about it one day, more tears. I got her schedule changed. Eventually she switched schools because, what she'd gone through were kind of traumatic. And I was driving home one day after I felt like the case was closed, and I just broke down in tears. And there was a counselor on the campus, and I talked to her about it, and she goes, "Oh, you experienced secondary trauma is what happened. You went through something similar as a kid," which I did, "and you saw it happening again. And even though you responded in the way that you would have wanted an adult to respond to you, the fact that you had to see it again just it reopened a core wound, and hence you crying all night." So, that is a special situation, although I did have different interactions with students where there were racist things said to me, about other students while I was on the campus. It did not happen a lot, but it did happen. On top of that, you have the fact that in any class, there's one of me and 35 to 38 of them. And I didn't even realize how daunting that can be until we had a career day, and this lady showed up, and she's like a showrunner. She's, like this big Hollywood exec, and she comes in to talk to my media class. And before she starts talking to them, her face goes completely red. And she's just like, "I don't know how you do this every day. They're so big." And I didn't think about them that way. They were big babies to me, Yeah, they were 5'9", 6 feet, but they're my babies. They're 5'9", 6 feet babies. Like they're 13 and 14. They don't bite. But she was just like full anxiety attack. And I didn't realize that like I had numbed myself to the task of that, going in and being the only one, being the only dolphin in a ocean full of sharks, basically. Because kids can be sharky. They can be sharky. You forget, things like needing your own personal space. You forget, what is anxiety? You're not allowed to have it. You got to go in there and you got to put that hammer down, and you got to take control of that classroom. Especially me, I'm short, I'm 5'3". A lot of times I'm looking up at the kids, "Stop throwing your gum in hair across the room." Stop eating so many hot and spicy Cheetos before 7:15 in the morning. Stop peeing on the side of the wall when you guys are out at lunch. Middle school boys are wild. But anyway, yeah, I don't even realize how much I have to like numb myself to certain realities. Like, it's only one of you in here. They could all revolt at any moment. Doesn't that make you nervous? It kind of does. It kind of does. But when I was working virtually, all of a sudden I got to really, really indulge and invest in emotional boundaries that aren't possible when you are working as a teacher. You can't create sort of your own emotional bubble as a teacher. There's no office you can go into and close the door. You can't just say, oh, I'm gonna work in my office for a couple hours and call me when the meeting starts, Jan. There's none of that. Your office is a classroom surrounded by children. And I was very fortunate because for most of my day, the kids were peaceful, they were studious, they were creative, they were so funny. Oh my God. Oh, we laughed. But then there were times that they were starting fights, they were using racist language, they were attacking each other, they were crying, and it's coming at you and it's all at once on top of your job, and it's a lot. So I think the number one thing I loved about virtual learning was being able to finally enjoy boundaries, emotional boundaries. Like, just know you can only do so much here. I had a situation where I was Zoom bombed, and Zoom bombing is just like you're on the Zoom and all of a sudden somebody comes in there that's not supposed to be in there. And the person started typing all these like expletives and stuff, F you, this, that. And if that had happened in a classroom, a kid just goes off and starts cursing, because it does happen. You got to first of all, you got to buck up and, you talking to me? You're not talking, whatever, or however you choose to handle it. You have some people that would be like, I understand those are your feelings, but tell me why you feel that way. That's not me. But some people do that. You got to call, the deans or the principal. You got to write the child. There's all these steps. When you're in a Zoom and something like that happens, remove from meeting, remove. Yes, I would like to report. Yes, and block. Fantastic. That is something I absolutely loved about virtual learning. Okay, so I do have an announcement. I will not be doing any more virtual teaching or any more teaching for the time being, because I have decided to leave the profession. But I'm going to explain why in another video on another date. But that is all for this video. Please, if you are a teacher and you do any kind of virtual teaching, if you teach media and you need any kind of resources, down below I'm going to be sharing things that I used not only this last year, but just over the years, and a couple little work samples of things I did with the kids. So yeah, please feel free to check it out, and thanks for watching.